If you feel like this video is somehow taking a dump on your favorite outdoor hobby, it probably is. I'm skeptical as to whether or not overlanding really exists in the United States. The Western United States are a great haven of public land, dirt roads, and off-road trails, but I'm not sure that what we have here in the lower 48 really holds up to the traditions of overlanding. We just have such short and perfectly well-maintained Forest Service roads. Every time I go out, I find that I'm not really limited by the state and the capability of my vehicle. Several months ago, I made a video, largely for my own enjoyment, but to also work through some thoughts that I've been having about this hobby and pastime. I posted this video expecting it to flop, but instead it reached an audience of hundreds of thousands of viewers, and I got to hear personally from thousands of commenters. Thank you so much for all of your thoughts. I think you all deserve some feedback and a more thorough analysis of this subject. Let's start with some definitions. Overlanding starts in Australia as early as 1906 in an attempt to open up new country. Wikipedia notes that overlanding can be recognized by a few characteristics, mainly long trips in remote areas using mechanized forms of travel. These trips are self-reliant in nature and often cross international boundaries. The journey, or the process of moving through all this country via these routes, is the primary goal of the activity, simply seeing if the trip can be accomplished and at what proficiency. As Wikipedia continues to explain overlanding and its place in the world, it goes on to mention several cross-country or cross-continental routes that are famous among overlanders, such as starting in Europe and making it all the way to Cape Town in South Africa, or traveling the entire length of the Americas. But you know what this webpage doesn't mention? It doesn't mention the United States, or Moab, or the Pacific Northwest, or the Alabama Hills, and it certainly doesn't mention overland expos. The Western United States are a great haven of public land, dirt roads, and off-road trails, but I'm not sure that what we have here in the lower 48 really holds up to the traditions of overlanding, especially not compared to transcontinental travel or opening up actual new routes on unexplored land that has previously not been conquered by vehicles. In my previous video, lots of people from other places like New Zealand, Australia, or Africa told me that what I have in the United States may be great, but it's not real overlanding. And from what I can tell, that seems plausible to me, that what I have access to in the United States is totally different than what overlanding looks like in other areas. Let's take my home state of Idaho, for example. I believe I've gone on one of the furthest remote journeys you can take in the state of Idaho. What I mean by this is I think that I found the very furthest that you can get a vehicle from a paved road. Now, this is different than the furthest distance you can drive on an unpaved road. That would be what I consider a through route, where you start on one paved road, drive on dirt, and end up on another paved road. Halfway along that through route would be the furthest you can get your vehicle from a paved road. In Idaho, I think the furthest that you can get a vehicle from a paved road is something like 57.5 miles. I've done it. It took me to a very remote trailhead in the middle of Idaho. And to get back to that paved road, you would have to turn around to that trailhead and go another 57.5 miles back. That makes a round trip of about 120 miles on dirt roads only. For what it's worth, the Pony Express, which is a well-regarded overland route in the United States, appears to be about 115 miles at its longest through route on unpaved roads. That's about a maximum of 55 miles from the nearest paved road. If you look at the Pony Express route from Salt Lake City to Tahoe, you'll see that much of it does run near paved roads. It has to cross over paved roads from time to time, and sometimes it runs somewhat adjacent to it. It's unlikely that the furthest distance you are from a paved road is ever even 55 miles. Not to mention, on that long stretch of 115 miles of unpaved roads is a town directly on that route. My point here is that just about any major overlanding route in the United States, especially in the lower 48, can be accomplished on a single tank of gas, unless you're willing to include paved roads as part of an overland route. To me, that doesn't quite sound like overlanding. Now, I think we in the West do have a couple opportunities to do overland or overland adjacent activities. One of these primary opportunities are, this video is brought to you by Onx Off-Road. I've been using Onx for almost a year now. As someone with many outdoor hobbies, I constantly find myself hopping onto Onx, looking for road information, points of interest, trying to put together camping trips, even overlanding trips using Onx. Mapping out my own routes and measuring distances along trails is super intuitive, and being able to download offline maps for use even when I don't have cell service is a real game changer. I'm always prepared even if I don't have cell service. Just this past weekend while I was out, I encountered an impassable washout along my planned route. But there was no reason to be concerned, and I certainly wasn't about to get lost because I had already downloaded the offline map for this area. So I simply turned the vehicle around, picked a different route, picked a different campsite, and got there problem-free, all because I had already downloaded all that offline map data. This app is a real help for when the unexpected happens. So if you're looking to sign up for Onx, be sure to use my discount code for 20% off of your subscription. It's in the description below. Backcountry discovery routes. Most of the western states, save Montana, have one. And even eastern states like Maine and Virginia also have their own backcountry discovery routes. These routes are comprised completely of trails open to full-size four-wheel drive travel, and they'll take you through some of the most scenic and challenging parts of your state. I've done small sections of the Idaho BDR, and it's a truly great route. It's arguable as to whether or not backcountry is the correct word for these routes, but there's no doubt that these trails will require more planning and more preparation to complete than your typical weekend camping trip. Especially in Idaho, where our passes freeze over and are only clear of snow for several months at a time, you'll benefit greatly from more planning and preparation. Things like spare fuel, chainsaws, and plenty of recovery equipment. But at the same time, there's no escaping that these routes will inevitably take you on and across highways and near towns and established population centers. For most, this might take away some of the overlanding feel, but it's inevitable. When you use mechanized travel, refueling is a part of the process. You can use those refueling stations as an opportunity to delve into the rich history of the West. In Idaho, thanks to our vast tracts of public land that are designated as wilderness, the furthest away that you can get from civilization, from paved roads, from the nearest post office is actually via bush plane and backcountry landing strips, or via non-mechanized travel through these wilderness areas. These lands are the most remote in the lower 48, and they afford no access via mechanized travel, let alone full-size four-wheel drive vehicles. If your rationale for getting into overlanding in the United States is to explore remote locations, you'll soon realize that a full-size four-wheel drive vehicle is the absolute most restricted form of travel for accomplishing this goal. Your access to pristine, unmolested, well-conserved country will greatly be increased if you choose to take up hiking or dirt bike riding instead. I've come to realize this myself as I spend more time hiking and car camping. There are just too many trails and lakes and mountains that I'll never be able to see if I don't ditch the vehicle, work on my own physical fitness to an extent, and start hiking to all of these places. And to be honest, overlanding doesn't challenge the body, and I get a lot of satisfaction from movement. Hiking and putting some real weight on my back gives me a lot more satisfaction than reaching destinations via vehicle. As someone with a 5-day-a-week office job, I can't imagine sitting on my butt and driving my truck all weekend long. It's just not gonna happen. I get a lot more out of setting out on foot with some real weight on my back. It's a challenge that I find far more engaging and far more practical. Driving a vehicle well off-road is a bit of a niche skill, and I think being able to go long distances with heavy packs is something that will serve me a little bit better. When driving, it's great to see so much country so fast, but I can't imagine doing this as the only goal of the activity. Driving down remote, dirt, bumpy, dusty roads can be fun, but it can only be fun for so long. I would never embark on this if this was the only part of it that I was supposed to enjoy. I absolutely have a destination and an activity in mind at the end of this route. I want to go fishing, hiking, camping, or hunting. I don't want to just drive just to drive. Maybe that's taking the definition of overlanding too seriously, but it's food for thought. Are we actually out here because the journey is the only part we enjoy? For the vast majority of us, I don't think that's the case. And of course, my final qualm, which seemed to resonate with so many of you. The gear feels out of control. I myself have long had dreams of fancy vehicles that are well built and have high performance equipment attached to them at every corner. But even as I've graduated school and entered the workforce, I haven't been able to find it in myself to actually throw money at these different pieces of equipment. Every time I go out, I find that I'm not really limited by the state and the capability of my vehicle. It works well as is. Truly, there's only a handful of trails in my home state that I might have an interest in doing, but can't because of the capability of my vehicle. Part of this is due to the makeup of public land in Idaho. Even though it's a very remote and not very densely populated state, most of our routes, if they're unpaved, are still some kind of maintained Forest Service road. Even the unmaintained roads that are four-wheel drive recommended tend to be fairly tame. The other side of this coin is that any of the real hardcore off-road trails or off-road parks in the States don't have anything attached to them. They're typically not routes that are going to take you to some kind of points of interest, whether that be a trailhead or a fire lookout. They're really not going anywhere. They just happen to be in really rough terrain. They're rock crawling routes, which is great and something I've explored in the past, but I'm not currently doing with my Tundra. What this leaves me with are a select few trails in my home state that go to some kind of point of interest or have a trailhead at the end of them, things like abandoned mines or alpine lakes, where the road does happen to be too difficult for my vehicle to accomplish in its current state. It's a goal to aim for and something that I could accomplish, but it's really only a small handful of trails and places that I can't already go. Fortunately for me, if I do want to go these places, hiking is free. There aren't routes that require me to use a four-wheel drive vehicle to get to them. I can always go on foot. And I understand that that isn't the case for everybody. I'm fortunate to experience that and get to have that opportunity. That being said, I have little interest in closing down four-wheel drive access. I'm happy that we have the access that we do. But I also love and enjoy the access that I have to places so remote that no vehicle can get to them and no vehicle ever will. And I get the opportunity to explore that on my own 2 feet and make a real challenge out of it. If you feel like this video is somehow taking a dump on your favorite outdoor hobby, well, it probably is. But it's really just a small video essay on why I'm skeptical as to whether or not overlanding really exists in the United States. We just have such short and perfectly well-maintained Forest Service roads. That's the fact. But I encourage you to enjoy your access to all these public lands. I certainly do myself, and I want the same for you. You and I might disagree on what to call the activity, but there's no doubt that we both enjoy the same thing: time outside, time away from the structured and busy lives that we might lead elsewhere. You and I both long for unstructured time where we can explore these beautiful and well-preserved ecosystems and have experiences that call back to a time when this part of the world was truly wild and unconquered.